We all want time to move forward right now.
Good evening and welcome to the March 26, 2020 School Committee special meeting. It is 7:09. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and I need to read to you a special reading per the governor. Pursuant to the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16, 2020, the Holliston School Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the district webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, we'll do a roll call attendance. Ms. Shaughnessy? Here. Ms. Koshin? Here. Ms. Stepnick?
Here.
Mr. Morton?
Present.
Ms. Naborski?
Here.
Ms. Hanstead will be joining us shortly. Mrs. Raffi here. So thank you and welcome. It is 7:10. This evening, we called this meeting to order to get an update from the superintendent on the status of this very uncertain, very uncharted time. So without further ado, Brad.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what your children are probably also experiencing, which is a remote meeting run through a piece of software called Zoom. The Holliston Public Schools reopened in terms in a virtual setting on Monday, last Monday, and so we are now in our fourth day of providing enhanced learning opportunities to our students. Since the last meeting on Friday, I sent out a email to all parents outlining what the enhanced learning opportunities were going to look like. On Saturday at 5 p.m., all 4 principals reached out to all of their families. And yes, it was arranged to be at 5 o'clock for all 4 of them. And each email included a video welcome back from the principal and/or assistant principals. There were a link to some great websites that were created by our staff for the purposes of providing our students with enhanced learning opportunities. Over the course of this week, the staff has been engaging with meeting and reaching out to students and reestablishing connection, checking in and making sure that they are, those who they're able to reach are socially and emotionally well and are beginning to make suggestions and interact with them in an effort to coach them in terms of future and how they could access the enhanced learning opportunities. Yesterday, seems like 100 years ago, but yesterday, Governor Baker, he announced that he was ordering schools to remain closed through May 4th. This is a change that we had anticipated when we developed our original enhanced learning plans. So we are about to, so they're going to close through May 4th. At the same time, this morning, actually early this afternoon, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education released a set of written guidelines that were developed by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in consultation with the Mass Association of School Committees, Mass Association of School Superintendents, the Mass Teachers Association, AFT Massachusetts, the Charter School Association, and the Massachusetts PTA. And those guidelines were distributed to school superintendents a little after noon today. We are in the process of assessing our current programming against those guidelines. There are several areas where we're going to have to review and probably make some adjustments in order to meet those guidelines. Specific to the guidelines are the specific recommendation that we provide, quote, a meaningful and productive learning for approximately half the length of a regular school day. We're going to have to assess our programming against that standard. We have to review our programs against the recommendation to provide students with the, quote, opportunity to connect with one or more educators multiple times per week. We believe we are meeting that standard, but we are in the process of still assessing that. We have to review our current program against the recommendation to provide students with time each day for physical activity based on the recommendations from educators, and review our current program against the recommendation to provide additional time daily for enrichment activities such as the arts. And finally, and this is probably the biggest, I wouldn't call it a gap, but the biggest adjustment that we will be looking to make is DESE has included a recommendation that teachers should provide feedback on student work completed at home. Our current program did not include a feedback component, and we will be adding one. So in the coming week, we are planning on doing two major things. First is we have to conduct an assessment of how many students we have reached, how many students we have yet to reach, and to determine the reasons why students are not engaging, if we have students who are not engaging. So we are collecting data over the course of this week that we will be assessing next week, and also reaching out to families based on that data. If we have families, for example, that have not connected to our website or have not responded to teacher emails or emails from the principal. So we are very purposefully want to ensure that we know that each and every student in Holliston has access and has the ability and the knowledge, the ability, and the resources to access our enhanced learning opportunities. Secondly, we are going to conduct that assessment of our current programming against the DESE standards and make put together a plan to make the required adjustments. I've asked the Assistant Superintendent, Peter Botello, to lead that effort in conjunction with the principals. That will result in an email, that will result in the rollout of what we're going to call phase 2 of this process, which is going to be, we're probably going to rename a remote learning plan, which will take many of the components of phase 1 and modified to meet the DESE guidelines. And we will announce that on Friday in an email from me. Also follow that up on Saturday, this is a week from Saturday now, a week from Saturday with an email from the principals, and then we will roll out that new plan and that new program on Monday, April 6th. I have to tell you that I've been in touch with superintendents from across Massachusetts, both in my role as superintendent here in Holliston and in my role as president of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents this year. And there are many districts who waited for the guidelines to come from DESE to even begin the planning process. So there have been students across Massachusetts who have not been receiving any access since the schools were shut down by the governor. It is not a majority, but it is a significant minority of schools that are still in the planning stage and are planning on rolling out something either Monday or a week from Monday as we roll out phase 2. So I'm very proud of the work that Holliston has done, led by Dr. Botello, Ms. Camiri, and our 4 principals, and supported by Mr. Boudet and Mr. McLeod from a technology perspective to get something out to our students in such a timely fashion. I was actually quite shocked to hear that there were so many districts that hadn't even rolled out something at all. So I am very pleased with the progress we've made this week. I am encouraged by the guidelines that have come from DESE, and I think we are eager and ready to adjust our programming to meet those guidelines and meet the needs of our students over the course of the next phase of our closing, which is currently slated to end on the first Friday in May.
So before I take questions, everyone has questions. Brad, while we're taking these questions, and I'm sure they're mostly going to be aimed at you, I also at some point want us to be able to respond to the parents who have children who are, in particular, seniors in high school, but juniors as well. This is unprecedented for everyone, but this is really hitting that cohort of students, in particularly emotionally, socially. I am concerned for them, and I would like us to have a response to them down to, you know what, we're gonna plan senior activities, even if it means we do it in July. Like, I know there are so many questions, and I know we need to take a breath and have some time, but at the same time, I am particularly sympathetic to that cohort of students right now. And I reached out to our student reps last week and just said, hey, checking in, hope you're doing okay. So whatever we can do to help those students, I need you to have that in the back of your mind as well. And you don't need to answer that right this moment.
Can I jump in with a point of order?
Lisa, what?
Can I just jump in with a point of order? I don't think we ever voted formally to go into to do remote participation. I was just looking at your email, and after our roll call vote, we were supposed to do another roll call vote to authorize us to go into a virtual meeting, I think.
Thank you. I can't read my email because I'm saying, thank you, Lisa. Is there a motion for remote participation? Roll call vote.
Second.
Moved by Lisa, seconded by Dawn. Ms. Shaughnessy?
Yes.
Ms. Koshin?
Yes.
Mrs. Listevnik?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yeah.
Ms. Naborski?
Yes.
Mrs. Hampstead?
Yes.
Mrs. Raffi, yes. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm going to go across the board the way you are on the screen. Lisa, Joan, question.
Brad, thank you for that update. Could you tell us, to the extent that you can, and I'm recognizing that it's not as simple as said and then done for you, could you tell us in plain English what has changed? How is our programming going to change from the expectations on the students up until this point, and then following into the phase 2. And while you're answering that in plain English, could you please answer, we're getting a lot of questions about access to the curriculum. And why aren't we, Connecticut's doing it and Minnesota's doing it. And could you speak to that too, about moving forward with learning and access to the curriculum, et cetera?
Could you repeat your first part of your question? I got overwhelmed by your second part.
Sorry. So the first part is, could you tell us in plain English what's changed? So DESE came out with this, but in Holliston, what has changed or what will change in terms of the expectations from students?
In terms of expectations from students, there's very little change you should expect. The major change that students will see is that they will now be receiving feedback from their teachers on the work that they submit. And the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is supporting districts to go so far as to offer providing a credit/no credit grade, if you will, on student work. The challenge, to answer your second part of your question.
Can I stop you right there? I have a follow-up question about that part. So if the child, for whatever reason, does not do the remote assignments, could that negatively impact their GPA?
No.
Thank you.
These assignments are the department and all of the state leadership recognizes that students across Massachusetts, both within Holliston and outside of Holliston, are at different levels of ability to be available to do this work. Some students are sick, for an extended period of time. Some students are in families where they are not, where they are struggling with providing care for, where the student is required to provide care for a younger sibling during the day because mom and dad are working at home. Some students are in homes where the focus has changed from school to what are we going to do without our next paycheck? So there is a concept, and I'm going to try to stay out of babble as much as possible. There's a concept in education that's referred to as ready to learn. That means a student is in a position where they can learn, where they are open to learning, they're available. And not all of our students in Holliston or across the state are in that position based on what is happening across the state, whether it be for physical illness reasons, for reasons of increased anxiety, for reasons of a variety of different reasons, for reasons of being unable or uncomfortable in this type of setting. So districts are prohibited from penalizing those students. So there is, the guidance that comes from DESE is very clear about that. So students cannot be penalized for either their inability to access this work. Let me quote, if I can, from the guidance from the department. Before moving forward with any determinations of, quote, no credit, we strongly urge districts and schools to consider whether the students have had equitable access to learning opportunities during this closure, keeping in mind the variety of technology, health, disability, and language challenges that could occur. So so that is the position of the department. It's a position with which I agree. We should not be penalizing students who don't feel they are able, or families don't feel they are able to commit to this type of learning. Another point that I think is important to emphasize is that there is a level of parental involvement and parental supervision beyond the level that currently occurs in a brick and mortar program that many students need in order to access this work. They need structure. They need a parent to stand next to them. They need somebody to re-explain something. They need help with the technology. Not every student has that help available. Not every student has that, and if it is available, it may not be available at the moment when it's needed because that parent is working or on a Zoom meeting or whatever. So there are a lot of circumstances that we need to take into consideration and not set a set of standards so broad and so high that do not take into account the unique circumstances of where we are today.
Lisa, then Dawn.
Thank you. Thanks, Brad, for all of that. My question is around IEPs and how that new guidance will change, if any. I'm particularly wondering if we're going to be able to get to a point where, especially some of the more complex IEPs, I'm thinking of kids who get physical therapy and occupational therapy and services like that, speech and language, if we're going to be able to set them up on a regular basis in some kind of video conferencing or whatever to do any of those types of services.
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate it because it reminds me to update the committee on that issue. Subsequent to your meeting a week ago, the Federal Department of Education basically reissued their advisory that in essence said, provide as much as you can in terms of services. We have been following that advisory since we opened on March 6th. So parents who have students parents of students with disabilities should have heard from their liaisons this week. They should have heard from their service providers this week. I know there have been remote physical therapy sessions that have taken place. I know that those types of things we've adjusted very, very quickly in order to bring the level of service up to the level we are able, given this physical distance that we must maintain. We're also working to develop, and our special educators are putting together plans, and in some cases executing plans to do small group instruction of students who are part of their caseload as they work on the projects and the tasks that have been made available to them by their classroom teacher. prior to that, I do think it's important to say that all of our special educators were part of the process of developing many of these tasks and had put in abilities to differentiate, for students to differentiate based on their ability. But frankly, we found that parents, understandably, were having difficulty recognizing how to do that differentiation themselves. So we have the special education liaisons have reached out to parents and said, in this particular case, this is what you should expect. This is the type of work we should be working towards for this particular task or for this particular item if your son or daughter chooses to do that.
Go ahead, Dawn. And then Andy, then Sim, then Ann Louise. I'm going around the blocks there.
Okay. First off, I want to be clear that part of what the federal guidelines, the DOE came out last week, the Office of Civil Rights for the DOE said we must address a serious misunderstanding that has recently circulated within the educational community. As school districts nationwide take necessary steps to protect the health and safety of their students, many are moving to virtual or online education, distance learning. Some educators, however, have been reluctant to provide any distance instruction because they believe that federal disability law presents insurmountable barriers to remote education. This is simply not true. We remind students, or we remind schools, they should not opt to close or decline to provide distance instruction at the expense of students, to address matters pertaining to services for students with disabilities. To be clear, we can comply with IDA Section 504 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act should not prevent any school from offering educational programs through distance instruction. I think that's important for the community to understand. Brad, you talked about the guidance from DESE that came out today. It was signed by the commissioner. It is, and I want to be clear on this because I think you used I think you may have used the words prohibited or DESE standards. To be clear, it is a remote learning recommendation. It says, please note that the guidance is a set of recommendations and does not constitute a requirement for any district or school. It actually encourages districts and schools to view the remote learning guidance below as a baseline or starting point that they can modify in collaboration with local stakeholders to fit their unique context, capacities, and needs. So that's what I want to talk about is Holliston's unique needs. And one of the unique needs we have is that we have a high school that's distinguishable from the middle school and distinguishable from the elementary school in this regard. We have block scheduling. That means that for half the year, you don't have English, you might not have math, you don't have history. And then we were approximately 6 weeks into something like 18 weeks of terms 3 and 4. So what we have is a situation where your high school students have received about 30 to 33% of their only history or their only English or their only Spanish or their only biology for the year. It's distinguishable from the middle school and the elementary school where we were 70-75% through the curriculum in those subjects. So my concern, and I want to be very candid with this community, that if we're going to stop curriculum, we have students that have only had 30-33% of the only math or the only science they're going to have for the year. And that's important because up to this date, we've counseled 8th grade families and high school families that you need to not only complete a certain course, but do well in it in order to be prepared for next year's course. So my concern is that we're very candid with the community that this enrichment program, if it's not going to offer additional curriculum for those students that have only gotten a third of their year's math or the third of their year's science, how are we going to prepare them for next year? So that's where I think this DESE document, which is just guidelines, it's not a mandate, and it says that we as the community or can modify it for our unique need, and that's Holliston's unique need. Let's talk about unique capacity. This community has invested heavily in technology, and we chose to do that for many years, over investing in other things. So I think the reasonable expectation from the community is that we're going to use that technology, especially when we've gone one-on-one for devices for 6th through 12th grade. But we have to do this in an equitable way. We need to reach everyone. And there are, I believe in the flexibility and the adaptability and the creativity of our teachers. They're some of the best teachers I've ever seen. You talked, Brad, about a situation where you might have a high school student who works as a cashier in a grocery store or is babysitting younger siblings. You might have, and I'm sure you do, teachers with toddlers underfoot. I think our teachers might be open to recording some of their instruction, their 20 minutes, their 30 minutes, their 40 minutes of instruction, and posting it.
They're doing it. Yeah.
And they're doing it. So I think that as long as they can remain flexible, I think we need to look at this document where it says our community's unique needs, the unique needs of our high school students that are stuck with this block scheduling, and our unique capacities, what we have available in terms of technology, and be flexible with deadlines. But we have students that have received 1/3 of their curriculum. So if our position is that we're not going to offer additional curriculum, I'm not sure how we can tell them they're going to be ready for next year.
I couldn't agree more. It was well said, Dawn.
Brad, do you want to digest that first and let Andy ask the question, or do you want to?
I understand the position that was stated. I think there are a number of students who are able to do that work, and I think there are a number of students who aren't. And I think that regardless, we are going to have, next year is going to look different than it would have if we hadn't had this shutdown. So I think this is going to end up being a multi-year recovery from this type of work. I think we can't begin to even assess the depth of which this current issue that we're facing is going to impact this community. And I think that right now, that is the approach that I think is most prudent.
Eloise?
Brad, I think a lot of what we're assessing here in terms of the readiness of our students is somewhat subjective. And so my question to you is twofold. Number one, we did field a survey that was largely just based on technology access. I'd like to know the results of that. But secondly, why aren't we reaching out to families to find out what their home situation is and whether or not they feel their students are in a position of readiness, particularly at the high school level, for all of the reasons that Dawn mentioned. And I say this because every community is unique. If this was downtown Boston, I think, we wouldn't be in a situation where we could potentially offer our students access to the curriculum, but it's not. It's Holliston. And as Dawn said, we do have an enormous capacity technically to support our students. We have a socioeconomic profile that by and large would suggest that we can do that. And I'm not suggesting by any means that it fits every student. I want to understand exactly, how challenged we are across the board. And I think we should also be surveying our teachers quickly to see how comfortable and able they are to do this. My observation is that the teachers are incredibly supportive. And in fact, just to offer a few quotes, because I've been watching my own high school student go through this, and she is a senior, and it's difficult. She was thrilled to be able to get on her class today with her math teacher. She's been looking forward to seeing him. She has another teacher who's an environmental science teacher and sent all the kids an invite to a webinar, and he copied the parents. And I thought he maybe made a mistake. And he said, no, I want the parents to know what I'm doing. And I wrote him a note, and he responded and said, thank you so much. I'm just really excited to see the kids. I didn't realize just how much I would miss being physically in the classroom. I miss them. I want to know they're okay, and I want to work with them. And, I think that is the general sentiment I'm seeing coming back from the teachers. My next door neighbor, who is a high school teacher in Wellesley, actually said to me across the street that even though she has 3 little kids underfoot, as Dawn said, she's in a better position right now to be able to read and evaluate papers because she simply has more time. Even with the 3 kids at home, she's able to pre-record her classes in some cases. And if the kids submit their homework, or their assignments, then she has more time to be able to grading them. And she said it's actually a bit of a luxury. And I also just want to point out that in the current environment, without any sense of needing to engage, there's no question some students won't. On one of my daughter's classes, only 3 kids got on. And so I think while we may be eager to offer enrichment, the fact remains that if students don't feel that they're accessing the curriculum and it's really, in their eyes, it might be engaging, but it's not required, it's optional, all of that. Kids are kids. They're not going to be motivated to do it, but if they feel that it's something that they're supposed to be doing to continue their education, and their parents are saying, you know what, we need to be doing this, right? Then I think they will. Maybe the grading scheme is different. Maybe it is pass-fail. I mean, I'm not concerned about GPAs here. I'm concerned about the learning. As Dawn said, it's really difficult to suggest that you can go from, algebra to, I don't even know what the next thing might be, like whatever it is, there's a building effect, geometry, this will have forever negative repercussions on more students than the potential negative repercussions that might happen for a handful of students if we don't do this. Maybe that's the best way to look at it. And I think in a world where our entire society is changing everything that we're doing to deal with this pandemic, and the concept of medical triage has changed what's happening at the front door of an ER, we should be looking at this as educational triage and doing the most that we can for as many of our students as possible. So I guess that's what I would say.
And I have to tell you, and I mean this very respectfully, I did not get into this business to do educational triage. I got into this business to serve every student in this community.
Yes,
and
every one of them.
And that is what I am trying to do to the best of our ability. And I think we have to respect that there are students across the spectrum of need in this community. That spectrum of need has skewed to the left-hand side based on this pandemic, and that adjustments need to be made. Now, one of the things I do think that is important, Anne-Louise, that you did mention that I'm sorry I didn't emphasize enough. We are going to be spending the next several days assessing how many students we have reached, and figuring out why we haven't connected with other students. I am open to the fact that they are not accessing it because it isn't required. And we can check that. I am also open to the fact that there are kids who are so terrified that they can't get they can't get out of bed in the morning. And I think we have to let the data drive that beyond and make some determinations. Having said that, anecdotally, I know that there are not many, I don't know, I won't say many. There are cases inside Holliston High School right now, well, inside is probably the wrong choice of words, that where there are teachers who have assessed their own class for readiness and have made some determinations about how they're going to proceed. And I am not, and never have been, nor will I ever hold those people back. I will, however, require that it be accessible to all, regardless of what circumstance they are in their family. So I am not patrolling the internet for new content and pulling it off. I am merely saying that we have a new paradigm that we need to adjust to, and that that recreating what was going on in February is not realistic.
I'm going to keep going with Andy and then Cynthia, and then I'll circle back to people who've raised their hands, okay? Because I just want to give everyone a shot.
Hi. Two things. One, at the elementary school, I haven't seen what's happening with the education, high school, middle school, but I've been super impressed with the ability of our classroom teachers to manage 19 children on Zoom. It's more of an air traffic control job than Mary Beth Numbers this morning did an absolutely remarkable job. I was seriously impressed. But actually what I wanted to speak about, Brad, if you can, is related to the AP exams. We've been getting guidance and some mixed messages and then more clarification to come at a future date. But what are we communicating to our high school students who are worried about those exams? Because at this point, we're getting back on May 4th, potentially, and those exams were supposed to start then. And maybe you can speak to how we're going to manage what we've heard so far from College Board.
I have to, in all honesty, that is a detail that I have not been following. I know the high school has, and I don't feel that I'm well enough informed to answer that question. I'd really hate to give bad information out or half information out over this medium.
Okay, so maybe for our next meeting, we can have just a quick update on that. Thanks.
Yep.
Andy, can I just ask, you teach AP history, don't you?
Yes, AP Euro.
But has that not come through the College Board to you as a teacher? Because I know what the College Board is posting, so I'm just curious what you're hearing.
It has, and it looks like those exams are going to be offered from what I've heard. And again, we're not going to use my word as gospel, please don't, but they're going to be online exams for students to do at home. They're going to be about 45 minutes in length, and depending on the topic, subject, class, the questions that are going to be asked are going to be potentially either a writing sample or two or multiple choice questions. They haven't totally determined all of that. So there's going to be some challenges with that where most teachers aren't all the way through the curriculum yet. And now the test is in a different format than we were expecting. So that's just kind of anecdotally what I've been reading. And I know that my district has communicated just today, actually, with our students, just kind of informing them of the updates and more information to come.
That's consistent with what Mary's teachers have told her as well, but they said that the open response written questions would not be part of it. So it would just be 45 minutes of multiple choice.
Okay, yeah, I think
yeah, it's a bit of a change in format for some of them, and again, because the curriculum wasn't finished, it's an issue.
I think there's been some advisement as to which, for lack of a better word, I forget what the word they use is, units. You know, if there's 10 of them, it's going to be covering 1 through 7 or something of that nature. It's a little different in history where it's chronological versus some of the other subject areas, but there are certain topics or units that are going to be covered on the exam and certain ones that are not, I think is the other piece of it.
Cynthia?
Hi. So I don't even know where to start. I feel like, you know, parents, kids, teachers are facing a slow-moving tsunami of circumstances that they are trying to navigate. And I feel like we need to be mindful of being flexible. And the idea that this is only a short term, like we only have to deal with this through this year, is a fallacy. This is something that we're going to be dealing with for years, likely. I don't know how our next school year is going to look, let alone how the remainder of this year is going to look. So I want to just caution us as we move forward that I feel like our remote learning should be focusing on deepening our students' understanding of curriculum. I'm not saying that we can't, for those where we're able to move forward, that would be great to be able to do that. I have a junior as well, but I will tell you that there are some kids that are not able to be accessible to learn right now. A lot of them, by the way. My daughter went to do a conference call with several of her different classes, and there were 3 different teachers in this whole help thing. She was the only student that showed up, and that's very concerning to me, that showed up to kind of, you know, just be present for that conference. And so there's got to be some reasons behind that, I'm guessing. And I think that as we move forward in remote learning, I just want us to focus on connecting with students and those relationships that we have with them, because frankly, without that, there is no learning that's going to happen if they don't have those relationships with their teachers. I think so far, I have, 3 kids in 3 different schools. I'm getting like a boatload of emails from, teachers, the schools, each of different schools, the principals, et cetera. And they have all been reaching out to my kids to check in with them, just to see how they're doing with those assignments. And I feel like they've been doing a really good job with that. And I really appreciate all the effort. And I also am just concerned that, like, when I think about teachers trying to take a curriculum that spent months that they were trying to put together for an in-school environment, to suddenly flip a switch and transition that somehow into a distance learning, I think is an incredible ask. And I think some people may be able to make those switches. Like the teachers that are actually recording their lessons and able to put those up, great. That's great if they're able to do that. I don't know where everybody else's curve is on that. So I just think that we need to be mindful of being flexible and supportive of our teachers, our students, our parents, as they move forward. Thanks.
And Louise, then Dawn, then Joan.
Yeah, Cynthia, I fully agree with everything you said. I mean, I really want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that we marginalize any students here by any stretch. I think it's really important that we continue to reach out, connect with, and support every student in the district. I just think that this optional enrichment model is, I think that's a huge part of why kids aren't getting on. The operative word there is optional, and until we ask our families what's happening at home, or check in with them, are your students able to check in, are they feeling anxious, whatever it is, we're simply not going to know. And I also think the same is true for our teachers. As you say, some are going to be more comfortable and able to translate their classroom-based curriculum into something that could be handled online, and others not so easily, for a whole host of reasons, right? Mm-hmm. But until we actively assess that, it's all anecdotal. And I think we really need to understand it. And more to the point, as you say, This is going to be with us for a while. The virus isn't going to get cured. We're trying to flatten the curve, right? And let's say we flatten it, but every ounce of data out there says that the virus itself will be around for a solid 18 months. We could very easily be facing this situation again next year. And I think we now have the sort of foresight to say, if this ever hits us again, how would we handle it? Are we going to just go into enrichment mode again? Because we don't know. We don't know if and when it'll rise up. And I'm not saying that in any way to be foreboding or panic people. On the contrary, eyes wide open. Let's be prepared and figure out as best as we can what we can do to make the curriculum accessible for all of our students, whatever that means. And it may mean something completely different than what it means right now. And I do think we have to be extremely thoughtful about the high school in particular because of the block scheduling, because of everything that that Dawn said. And I guess I'll close on this last point. It's actually what Stacy started with. Our juniors and seniors are facing particular challenges with respect to standardized exams and MCAS that they need to graduate, which, I assume the state will make a decision across the board one way or the other. Taking exams and applying to college, things that now are extraordinarily changed for those students. The juniors are going to be in typically an unusually difficult position trying to sort through that and go visit schools, which is what you normally would be doing at this point in time, right? And it's now becoming a virtual exercise, and God bless the internet for that, but it's still a challenge. And students who've recently been accepted to colleges and are trying to decide which schools to go to cannot visit them. They're in an impossible position making choices. And our seniors are sitting here wondering, here are the things that we're hearing. It's not just about the activities. There is a lot of emotion around that. I'm not going to have the senior shirt day when they all come in and wear their shirts. They're not going to have their prom is what they're thinking. They're not going to have whatever. Is graduation even going to happen? Like, that's a really, really, really big deal. The words I heard were, I have worked so hard for 14 years and now I don't get to celebrate that accomplishment. And the last piece of this, which is really important, is what will their fourth term credits look like? I've had parents who reach out to say to me, my child's supposed to have 2 more history credits to graduate, and that's supposed to happen in the last term. And where is that right now? And why haven't I heard anything about that? And what will I do if colleges expect those requirements? Well, I'd like to think colleges will be flexible too. And I think our parents are being patient. They're being patient. But sooner rather than later, we are going to have to get out some sort of information on this. That's it.
Go ahead, Dawn.
Okay. So I do want to say that our mandate as school committee members is to pursue the highest level of educational achievement for all of our students. And it's based on what the community can provide. What we have from DESE is guidelines, recommendations, baseline. We can do better. We can ask for more. In fact, the governor's order on March 15th, 4th paragraph up, it says public school superintendents are directed to consult with their school boards, teaching staff, and other stakeholders how best to provide student access to alternative learning opportunities during this period. And that's important because this school took a survey over a week ago about access to devices and ability to do this. And we need to know what the impediments are and how far we can go with this, how best to reach all of our students for the highest level they can attain through May 4th. And if we have to go beyond that, then we go beyond that. In terms of transitioning to distance learning, this is a challenge across the board for any company, a private company lucky enough to still be doing business right now in public and private life. Distance learning, remote learning, communicating like this, it's a challenge for everyone. We know we need to be flexible, but we need to do the absolute best we can for our students with everything we have. So I do want people to consider that it's a guideline, it's a recommendation. We have families simply asking for the rest of the curriculum, that 2/3 of their high school curriculum that they weren't going to get. And I'd love to hear a commitment that we're going to at least post it. But I also have great concerns over equity, where there's a number of tutors through Holliston, and people with means, affluent people in this community, will be educating their kids. So I want to do the best job we can for every single student with everything we have.
Before I let you go on with the questions, I do want to pause and let Brad respond to some of this, because I think we've, pummeled him with a lot of points, and I want to give him some opportunity to respond, and then it will be Joan. What, Joan?
Actually, before you let Brad comment, I would like to sort of present a counterpoint, and then maybe him react to both. It's up to you.
Go ahead, quickly.
Quickly. The way I'm looking at this is all the boats go up, all the boats go down. So it's not just in terms of readiness for next year, all of our children aren't going to be ready. We are going to need to have adjustments across the board. Colleges are going to need it. Our society is going to have a seismic paradigm change. I think when we talk about access to curriculum and readiness to learn, everyone is thinking Chromebooks and internet access. We have kids that can't get out of bed. We have kids that are strangled by their anxieties. We have kids with parents who are laid off or at home who are drinking all day. We can't say, well, so many of our kids are ready to go. That's not what equitable access to free and public education is. We can't just say, let's go forward with the curriculum when we have kids, maybe kids you wouldn't expect, that can't get out of bed in the morning. Overachieving kids that have been given enrichment assignments that can't get through a half a page. Maybe because their parents are anxious. Maybe because they are anxious. Maybe they're watching too much news. I don't know. But here's what I do know. If parents are saying, well, if you don't require it, they won't do it. That is a family decision. If you feel that that should be required in your house, then make it required in your house. That is your expectation of your child. We have not an insignificant population who is not ready to learn right now for a myriad of reasons. So while I appreciate and I would support a go-getter student that wanted access to the curriculum and the ability to move forward, I would be very mindful of the children they're leaving behind. And I think a lot of those children that are left behind are children who have high needs or children who live with a low rumble of anxiety on a given day, but are now exploding and can't work. And I think that Brad is always going to stick up for those children. Brad is always going to advocate for those children. Brad?
Well, Brad, before you say anything, I just want to jump in. Joan, no, I don't think anyone on this committee disagrees with you. And I think we should be helping those students and we should be giving them support.
Yes.
But if you're saying we need to figure out distance learning for credit.
Nobody said that. Nobody said that.
Well, we are actually providing them with education.
Progress in the curriculum. Progress with the curriculum. That's what I'm hearing. And what I'm saying is that and you said earlier, Anne Louise, like so many of our kids are ready for that, but so many are not. That's like saying if you didn't have.
Let me clarify what
Brad, can we please let Brad talk now?
Yeah, I just know because Joan just said I said something that I didn't say. I said earlier, this is not about GPAs. I'm concerned about the learning, number one. Number two, I was encouraging us to get an assessment from our families directly on how things are going and whether they feel their children are ready or able. I don't want to make decisions based on anecdotal assessments. That's what I'm saying. And I think we should do the same with our teachers. And then with that information in hand, we will be in a better position to design the learning opportunities and determine how best we can proceed.
Yeah, there was another component to this in that, Brad, in when you respond, is that if we were to do flipped learning, is that a change in working condition under the contract?
Go ahead, Brad.
Thank you. I recognize, obviously, this is an emotional issue for a lot of people. I think this conversation only serves to illustrate how the level of stress that adults are feeling in the middle of this issue. And a committee that I've worked with for years, I've actually never heard this level of conversation, which is just, I think it's important to point out because I just think it reflects the fact that emotions are running high. And I think that is one of the points I'm trying to make around the issue of readiness to learn. So there are a couple of issues I would like to briefly address. I bristle at the suggestion that there is not learning opportunities out there. There are learning opportunities out there that teachers have developed that will advance students' learning. Will it move them down the scope and sequence? Perhaps not. But will it advance their understanding of the material that they've been asked to learn? Absolutely. And to suggest that this is stopping learning or is not learning is absolutely, and I'm not, so I want to just.
No one said that, Brad.
I just want to make sure that suggestion is not out there. The second thing I wanted to share is I have never, ever, ever, ever said that this is because any of these decisions are being driven by teacher ability or by a lack of technology. They are not driven by either of those things. We have ample technology. We have outstanding teachers. Teachers can do this if our students and their families were ready to receive this. Third point is this is about the next 4 weeks. What will happen after 4 weeks? What will happen in August? No one in this room, virtual room, can predict. We are looking at this in chunks, and for the next 4 weeks, this is our plan. Finally, I do want to emphasize that this is a partnership between parents and the school. And optional from a school perspective doesn't necessarily mean that parents have to make it the same way. And that is a decision that can be made by individual parents parenting their children. And if a parent wants a child to participate in a Google chat or in a Google Hangout with their teachers, then they have ample opportunity. They have the accessibility to do that. And so this partnership, we can provide, but we can just lead the horse to water. And so this partnership and the role of the parent in this new framework is more critical than ever. It is not, the parent has to be partial teacher in this model. They have to redirect when they are not focused. They have to check in more often. They have to answer questions that they may not have been able to answer, that they may not have been called upon to answer before. They have to help a student sequence their work where a teacher may have done that before. So this will fail without a partnership. And I think that is a crucial element that needs to be continued to talk about. So my plan for the next 4 weeks is that we are going to adjust our current model based on the guidelines from DESE. We are going to assess our student, the number of students that we are reaching currently and the number of students that we are not reaching currently, and try to figure out why we are not reaching those students. And if we need to make adjustments to this model based on that, we will, because accessing students and making this accessible to students is the first challenge.
Lisa had a question, and then Dawn, and then Peter. Would love to hear your thoughts. You've been quiet, so you have the opportunity if you want to speak as soon as Lisa and Dawn.
Yeah, so my question, I think my question was mostly just answered, but I just want to say, I just want to put in, I mean, I don't disagree with the idea that high schoolers are in a different position than the rest of our kids because of DSB. I think, it's a very valid point that high school kids are a third of the way through the curriculum, whereas kids in other grades are 70% through their curriculum for the year, roughly. So I just think the name of the game is going to have to be flexibility in every way. I think we're going to have to look at high school kids differently than we look at the rest of the kids because of DSB and because of the
scheduling.
Huh?
You mean the block schedule?
I'm sorry. Yes, I don't know. Obviously, I don't have a high schooler. Yes, I meant block scheduling. Because of block scheduling, they are not as far through the curriculum in their subject areas as elementary and middle school kids are through their subject areas. So, there's nothing equitable about any of this. And there's not going to be a perfect solution. Some kids are going to have more help at home. Some kids are easier to help than others. And I don't want to beat a dead horse. I think all of these points have been made. I just want to put in a vote for flexibility across the board in terms of, providing as much as those go-getters want to do, while, also accepting that there are some kids who are not available for learning and that there are some kids who are going to remain that way for a while. We're going to have to retool, I imagine, our social emotional efforts in the coming year as more and more kids, are faced with anxiety triggers that, we've never had to deal with. And we already have anxiety rates that are sky high. And now we're adding an unprecedented calamity on top of everything else. So, I feel like, I don't disagree with anything anyone is saying. I think it's just this whole situation is going to require all of us to be flexible, for parents to be flexible, for educators to be flexible. We're just going to have to figure out as we go along what works and what doesn't. But I don't think I think we're going to have to let go of this idea of some perfect equity. I think the go-getters are going to get ahead if they want to spend all day, not doing video games, which is what, my child is basically doing. I'm lucky if I can get 30 minutes of academic work out of him a day. We're doing the best we can, but I've been the only parent at home and I've been working. So, I feel like, there are going to be some gaps opening up, and we're just going to have to deal with that as we go along. But I don't want to see, the go-getters not getting what they need because there are kids who aren't available for learning. I feel like we're going to have to just address these gaps at some point down the road. I don't think that there's, any reason not to advance the curriculum, especially at the high school level at some point. Maybe this first month isn't the time to do that, but if we really aren't going back for the rest of the school year, that's something we're going to have to think about. And we're going to have to find a middle road. That's it. But thank you, Brad, for all your work.
And I also wanted to thank you for all of your work. I did want to say, when I talk about everything we have to address all of these needs, we have school psychologists, we have guidance counselors, we need to start setting up one-on-ones, we have paraprofessionals. We need to be doing one-on-one, as much time, FaceTime with kids that we can get as part of this program. I am worried about waiting until May 4th for changes. It is March 26th. We have just completed 1 week of school. So we are going to be kicking the can then 5, 6, 7 weeks into this before we're talking about a shift. And I do recognize that the school did some level of survey and it was on devices. So I would like to know what some of the impediments are in terms of the results of that survey and making sure that our kids have the devices. I know last week we voted on funding $21,000 additional dollars for devices to get more paraprofessionals and whatever need was out there. So, and I hear you, Brad, you said it wasn't about the technology or the devices and it wasn't driven by our teachers, but I do think we can come up with solutions. We need to provide the absolute best for everyone, and everyone will have different needs, but there are schools that are setting up one-on-ones and check-ins with the school psychologist, the guidance counselor, one-on-ones. Everything we have. So.
Those are happening. I'm not sure where you got the idea that wasn't happening. That is
okay.
Happening.
Just wanted to make sure.
Gosh.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should have. I'd appreciate it. I would appreciate it if you wouldn't assume that wasn't happening, but it is happening, of course. We also, as I reported at the last meeting, we're meeting with Youth and Family Services and the Holliston Police Department and the Holliston Fire Department every week to review families in need and ensuring that who may not have been on our radar, to ensure that they get added to our list and get either folded into the Youth and Family Services umbrella or into the Holliston Public Schools umbrella for support.
I just want to reiterate, the intention of the high school and the entire district is to provide the very best learning opportunities we can in this extraordinary time. Like, we're not intending in any way to hold back, but we're also recognizing, like, I equate it to, sometimes you go through those periods where you get like 25% of the kids having the flu during those really crazy years. We have to plan instruction in a way that takes into account that kids are going to have very, very different abilities to access on a day-to-day basis. So for us to kind of just create a curriculum that just continues to move without taking into account the need for greater flexibility is going to leave tons of kids behind. We are in the process of assessing kids' ability to be available and learn. That assessment in and of itself is incredibly complex. It's not like what you can do when you get the kids into the classroom and can have conversations. So even like learning about what kids' particular needs are, despite all the outreach that's happening by staff members, is incredibly complex. But what we plan to do prior to the guidance and with the guidance is to continue to revise and improve in service to kids in learning. And so we're never going to kind of stop and say, okay, this is the plan and it doesn't continue to evolve. Every week it's evolving. And it's not just evolving based upon the guidance, but it's evolving but based upon, what administrators and teachers, based upon what they're seeing and they can see in this very extraordinary time, will work for kids going forward. So, things will continue to revise and continue to improve, and we'll continue to add elements on, but people are working incredibly hard, but it's an incredibly complicated time. It's not just like setting up an online course where kids sign up. We're in times with kids and families are in very, very difficult situations where there's very few kids who are able to, be in front of a computer multiple hours of the day without disruption. So we have to take that into account as we move forward.
Go ahead, Brad. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. If I could just add one piece of data to kind of illustrate the challenges associated with getting good data. We talked earlier about the very high-level survey we sent out about internet access and access to devices. 388 students at the high school did not respond to that survey. Now, we all know they have devices, and for the most part, we're pretty sure they have internet access because they would have told us because of their Chromebook requires it. So I offer this as an example of accessibility to our students right now. Now, maybe they responded because they didn't respond because they thought it was a stupid question, or maybe they didn't respond because they were surveyed out. But that's a pretty significant number of students who didn't respond to a pretty simple survey about internet access that essentially was designed to assess internet access and device needs at the elementary level. So it's just an example of a data point, not a defining data point, but a data point about the lack of normalcy that we are experiencing right now.
And Louise.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly, and then I'll comment. But did you say 388 at the high school or elementary? It was
at the high school.
So I thought that survey was sent to parents. It was sent to students.
Did not respond, whether they were parents or students. There were 388 students for whom we did not have data.
Okay, so you don't have data for 388, but it'd be good to know. I actually thought that was sent to parents, which I'd be surprised if that many parents didn't respond. But anyway, that's helpful. I guess I just want to be clear. I completely agree with the notion of flexibility, and I think that's important. I just want to make, and Peter, I can hear in your voice like the enormous stress and complexity and the stress that creates with trying to do all of this on the fly. I mean, let's be clear. There is no model for it. There's a lot of precedent for distance learning in higher education. So even for universities making that switch, as hard as it was, I think they're able to make it a little bit more easily. And you're dealing with a more mature student, but we don't have that. I get that. And I want to commend our teachers. This is not about the lack of creativity with our teachers. I mean, I've been so impressed. Tomorrow, one of my girls class is baking a cake as a class in French. Every kitchen is going to be baking the cake, I guess. And they'll be talking while they do it. And one of my college students asked if she could join because she was so excited about baking a cake in French. So I think there is a lot of creativity here. And this is not what this is about. There's no question our teachers have the wherewithal. And I do think flexibility is important. I just think getting a better understanding of what families are really dealing with. I appreciate that can change at any point in time. I agree with Dawn's comment that if we can post the curriculum so that students have access to it if they want it, if they can take advantage of that, would be helpful. Otherwise, they're kind of left wondering how they're going to complete some of their courses potentially and be prepared to take certain exams. So I think Lisa's comment about, doing the most that we can for each of these kids and accepting the fact that there may be some gaps there that we're going to have to address over the long haul is a very accurate assessment of where we're going to be. So that's all.
Okay, I feel like we've exhausted this conversation. I think it's a conversation we're going to continue. I think we're, just to be clear for everyone about all the comments, we care about all the students. We care about the teachers. We think they're doing a phenomenal job. So let's just, I do not want the message to be out there in the community that the school committee is, wagging their finger at anyone. We're not. We are behind you all. We're in this together. So with that being said, I want everyone to take a collective deep breath. We're going to switch gears. The other part of this update, Dawn.
Steve, something I brought up before, and that was about things like graduation or prom or the middle school play. And is that something we could discuss while covering this topic in terms of our school's commitment to postponing these things? Should we get there, right? Should we get there? And doing our absolute best to reschedule them. So that's one thing. The other thing, I did notice that other school districts around us, like Natick, for example, looking ahead at things like spring sports. And I know right now we have a May 4th date, but should that get moved, there are schools around our community who, if they're not going to have a spring sports schedule, we're starting to look at fees. Do we return fees? Are we still collecting fees where sports aren't happening? These are other things I think, if not to talk about tonight, then we need to put it out there for next week.
Yeah.
But so those are my two things, just our commitment to postponing and trying to reschedule these things as they come up. And then also we need to start talking about what to do with things like fees.
Yep, no, I agree. So I'm not sure we're prepared to actually have a logical discussion about it tonight in terms of fees or whatnot and what might happen. I would like to have the conversation next week. And Brad, if you even want us to vote on it, I would like us to be able to get the message out there that, we're committed to sticking with some of these activities, however we do that. And I'm happy to lead the charge if you need someone to lead the charge in terms of getting a committee together or something. So whatever you need from us, but we can certainly talk about it next week if you want to try and gather some data with Matt Baker.
I want to make sure we don't add another level of complexity to the decision-making process here, and the issues. I certainly understand issues like graduation, having a connection to the role and responsibility of the school committee. the issues around spring sports are going to be addressed when we know more. And obviously, if their spring sports are canceled, we will refund the spring sports fees. The issues around the other activities, I think are I think it is important to not develop too many plans on a moving battlefield, so to speak, and you know that you know, if I were sure that we were going to reopen on May 4th, I'd be going ahead with all sorts of plans. But you know, everyone is going to have to learn to live with a little uncertainty, and I know that is taxing on parents' patience. But you know, we are dealing still with an issue that is accelerating up, not down. And until I don't think anybody in this state can offer any clarity about the length of this shutdown. So I think we just have to keep focused on the things we can control. Make decisions at the administrative level when they need to be made, and communicate them as soon as they're made. And that's my plan going forward.
And Brett, you can slap me later for this. Respectfully, there's a difference between commitment and clarity. And Dawn and I think, are on the same page about, I want to commit to the at least the seniors that we will work to make sure that there is something to celebrate their year. It may not be what we traditionally planned, but I want to commit that we're going to do something for them and with them, because you know, this is their year and they're still children. And I think I just want to be clear about that we want to commit to support doing something to celebrate them. I know it's uncertain and I know we don't know what to do, but I want the kids to hear that message because I think they need to hear it. I mean, right now, that's what they're thinking about. It's spring fever, right? Like, it's supposed to be my prom season and this is a part of it, social and emotional. And I don't want to beat that dead horse.
Yeah, these kids are mourning that loss for sure. I mean, you feel that. I mean, I can't imagine how Mary's feeling.
Well, it's been tough because all of this falls during the week when college decisions come out and all of that for a lot of kids, or two. But I think, Brad, look, no, I don't want to overstep. You're going to laugh hearing me say that, but but I do really mean that.
My screen froze when you said that.
Right. But I think the challenge here is planning a little bit, and so let me just throw this out, and then maybe there is an offline conversation we can have with Nicole. Because I'm wearing two hats. I'm wearing three hats. I'm wearing my senior parent hat. I'm wearing school committee hat right now, but I'm also the class parent for our graduating seniors, along with Hillary Freely. And while prom is a school-sponsored event, it is also largely the responsibility of senior parents to kind of, there's some surround sound activity on that, that we as class parents are responsible for and communicating, et cetera. And Hillary's daughter is one of the officers for the senior class. So just today, we reached out because we're like, should we be calling Union Station in Worcester to see if there are other available dates? Because our big fear is that, and I recognize prom is 2 weeks after the next shutdown reopen date. But what we won't be able to do is wait until then to make decisions, because there's only 3 dates in June that Union Station has available should we choose to put it off. So I would rather be thoughtful for both our juniors and seniors with things like prom and graduation, and at least come up with a tentative plan, you know, a contingency that says, if this thing doesn't, you know, if the shutdown gets extended, we'll push everything out 3 weeks. I don't know. Or here, among those 3 dates, this would be our preference, so that we can reach out to Union Station and say, hey, this is what we're thinking, before a dozen other high schools do and the kids have no place to go. You know what I'm saying? So we're trying, and I get it in the context of everything that you're dealing with, prom and graduation and baccalaureate and, you know, senior t-shirt day and what is it, senior assassination, where they all run around with water pistols, and like, these things are small and yet they're not in their world. So if there was a way to kind of sit down and just find 1 hour, and it doesn't have to be tomorrow, obviously, like, you know, I get it, but to try to come up with a alternate schedule for our seniors that might reorganize these things. I mean, I don't know, maybe prom is 4 days before graduation, who knows? And it all gets pushed out 3 weeks. But if there was a way to plan so that we don't find ourselves caught off guard with no venues, no place to go, not, you know, we'll be stuck. We won't be able to do it on the fly.
You know, I'd encourage you and the other senior class parent to reach out to Nicole and have that conversation. She may be also talking, or the senior class advisor may also be talking to Union Station or other venues. I don't know what's happening there. So.
We've reached out to them. They, you know, they're sitting tight because they don't have information, and so, all right, I'll reach out to Nicole. Perfect.
Okay, so let's everyone take a collective breath for a minute, and we are going to just continue the conversation specific to budget. Anne Louise and I had a conversation the other night, and when the school committee voted the budget to bring forth to town meeting, the world was a different place. And so I'd like to have a conversation about this tonight. I think we need to make some decisions, et cetera, about what we do moving forward. In light of the fact that we do not know if town meeting is going to be held in May or June. So, Anne Louise, you want to take it from there?
Sure. Well, Tuesday morning we had, a budget subcommittee meeting with the liaisons from the finance committee. 2 purposes. One, we had an executive session to simply update them on our recent discussions and contract negotiations with the HFT. But then separate and apart from that, we were looking for an update from them with respect to what they're hearing at a state level, what they're seeing in terms of town finances, and the concerns they may have about the town's ability to manage itself financially through this crisis, and how that potentially impacts the schools. And let me just say, we have another meeting with the finance committee liaisons tomorrow, and we're going to keep meeting on a pretty regular basis because this is so fluid. So, you know, really where we came out is that bottom line is, in this environment, the budget that we voted and approved, it's not viable. I don't know how to say that any other way. The world looked extraordinarily different in early February when we voted that. The market was at an all-time high, unemployment was at an all-time low, and our town finances were in extremely good shape. And even in that scenario, there was a lot of back and forth over where any free cash should go, if you will. That's just putting it in the most simple terms I can put it. And now everything is flip-flopped. So I think we are going to have to make some hard choices. What I want to propose, Stacy, is that because we do have a budget subcommittee meeting tomorrow, and I'd forgotten about that when you and I were chatting, I think it might be appropriate to let the budget subcommittee come back with a voted, like a recommended revision to the budget that we could consider next week. But I think just knowing that where we stand right now, we not only won't get any support for it, I think it compromises the school committee's credibility not to make adjustments, and that's something we really need to consider carefully.
The only, sorry, not to interrupt you, but next week our budget hearing is scheduled, and I don't want to speak off the cuff because I don't have it in front of me. Where we've already posted it, can that change? I know this.
Yeah, we can. That's a good point. I think we can move that, and I think, or we can set up 2 budget hearings if we want. We can host it and see, what the community's specific concerns are, and take those into consideration, and then have a second one if we like, or we can just put that off and go to the community with a budget that is potentially revised. So that's certainly something we can do. And maybe what we should do, Stace, is, well, certainly we can get everybody's feedback on that now, but we can come back with that after our liaison meeting tomorrow. In terms of the things that the town is grappling with, it's issues similar to our own. They are trying to address the concept of dealing with hourly employees across the town. A substantial portion of the employees at Town Hall are hourly. I know that topic keeps coming up, but most of them are covered by the budget, unlike some of ours. But there are other town employees that are hourly and for whom the budget may not be covering them. So, you got what you do for one, you do for all. So those are key considerations that they have. They're, I think, mostly worried that state aid is going to decline significantly next year. And we don't know by how much. We don't know what that impact will be. And we won't know probably for a couple of months, which makes this whole thing a little bit tricky. So that was a big part of our conversation. It's hard because of the uncertainty to know exactly where to go. I will say this, I think the Finance Committee expressed incredible support for the schools. The tenor of that conversation was collaborative and positive, but guarded because they're worried. I think they don't want to see us pursue a budget that would require an override to support, and one that is a risky override. You know what I'm saying? So and yet they were very clear that if it's over 1%, they don't see any other way to support it. So, that's not necessarily things we haven't heard in the past, but I think the environment's different. So that's where we're at. I don't know if Lisa or Andy have anything else to add on this until we have tomorrow's meeting. Do you guys want to say something?
Can Brad just answer my question of the public hearing? And then
yeah.
Andy, sorry, I just want to.
Good.
Thank you. State law requires the school committee to hold a public hearing on your budget no more than 30 days prior to town meeting. So if town meeting is not changed, the date for the public hearing, it has to be at least 30 days prior. So if we don't know officially about when town meeting is changed to, I would recommend that you hold your public hearing at the next meeting, as we have posted, and we also, and a public hearing also has to be advertised in a local newspaper. So we've done that as well, and we can hold the public hearing. The school committee can change its budget anytime after, before, during the public hearing. The only requirement is that you hold a public hearing.
Joan?
Sorry, just a quick question. Could somebody on the budget subcommittee please remind the rest of the committee and the public what our what percent over guideline and what percent over last year's town meeting voted budget is our run rate projected for 2021?
So
it's like 2.43 or something like that.
The total budget that we voted was 4.
Yeah,
what?
That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a run rate.
I know, but the first question was how much over guideline it is. So the total budget that we voted was 4.78, and because guideline is 1%, it's 3.78 points over guideline. So that's the first question. And
yeah, that wasn't the question, but it's fine. That's fine.
I thought you asked what was over guideline.
I wanted to know what run rate was over guideline.
Oh, okay. So guideline, the run rate was 2.78, Brad, or was it 2.75? I
thought it was somewhere around 2.4, but I didn't remember.
2.72.
2.72. So we're still almost 2 percentage points over guideline with our run rate.
We're $600,000 over guideline.
Yes. So it's, it's meaningful. It's especially meaningful in this environment, but they, the degree to which they can support that is going to be a function of the degree to which other extraordinary expenses arise over the course of this economic slowdown. So that's what we don't have a good answer to right now. We may have a little bit better answer tomorrow or not. So a little bit of a market rally over the last few days. So maybe it's looking better. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
So Brad, can we then have the budget subcommittee have their meeting tomorrow? Can a memo be sent in the packet tomorrow afternoon so that during the budget hearing, can we vote on changing the budget? That way the committee will have more information, enough information to make a decision? Or do you recommend we vote a budget tonight?
I think it's at the will of the committee. The public hearing and the budget, the final budget that the school committee brings to town meeting, the public hearing doesn't have to be about the explicit budget that you're bringing to town meeting. You have to just hold a public hearing. That's all it says. So you can, people can comment on the current state of the budget as you have it, and provide the committee with input. The purpose behind a public hearing is somewhat antiquated. It actually comes from the days before cable access, when budget meetings were held in smoke-filled rooms full of men predominantly, who constantly make bad decisions in those environments. And it was to provide some transparency to the budget process. So it really is, our budget hearings in the past have lasted 30 seconds, where we just open it up to questions. There are none from the public, and we close the public hearing and continue with the business of the meeting. obviously, we're going to have to put some technology in place to allow the public to provide input during the hearing, and Keith and I and HCAT are working, or Keith and HCAT are working on that. But the issues don't really connect. You can vote the budget, you can change the budget at a posted hearing 30 minutes before town meeting.
Thank you. So I am open to whatever the committee would like to do this evening. My personal message to the budget subcommittee is I am at this point in time comfortable with a run rate budget and nothing further, with the discussion that if things change over the summer, there are critical needs that like the substitute teacher at the high school, for example, that I think we need to consider if and only the state aid is higher, et cetera, et cetera. So if the committee wants to wait until next week to make a decision, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to share my personal thoughts with the budget subcommittee as you go into that meeting tomorrow. Do you guys want to just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down if you want to vote on it tonight?
Well, can I?
I'll make a motion. I would make a motion on what to vote on if you want.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I know several committee members have come with different points of view on this, and I think the only reason I was thinking we should sit down in the subcommittee first, which I could go either way, I could be persuaded either way right now, is that there were two things, forgive me, just for everybody, I've got bronchitis. There are two things that, like, if we were to cut this down dramatically, two things that I do think warrant a little discussion. The high school permanent substitute, and from my vantage point, is a self-funded position, if you will, because the cost of hiring subs will cost more than the use of a permanent sub, if you will. So to me, it's actually a budget neutral or more efficient use of money toward that problem, if you will. So that one I do think makes sense to keep in above the run rate. And then the other question on the table is really mood check. And this one, I think we've all talked about, we unanimously sort of concurred several meetings ago on the importance of it. The only real question is, can the cost of that program be reduced? I don't know that there would be additional funds for it, a grant or anything else, but, you know, I would love for us to explore a way to make that more efficient. I think it's going to be needed more than ever after what we're going through. I really do. So I don't want to see that sacrificed, but I do also think that there's got to be a way to bring the cost down. So those were some of the issues I wanted to review with the subcommittee tomorrow, and if there was anything new coming from the liaisons from the finance committee. But if we're comfortable just voting tonight, I'm fine with that.
I'm 100% on the same page in terms of both mood check and the permanent substitute. I mean, I don't know what the appetite is for, voting tonight, but I would vote that budget, knowing that we may still have to cut the permanent substitute and mood check. I understand that, but I would like to at least make a case for those two things. I don't know how other people feel about voting tonight, but I would be comfortable with that.
Do you mind if we go to Andy, since he's on the budget subcommittee? Just give him a chance to weigh in here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that those are in particular two of the real.
Hold on, we lost Andy for a second.
Andy was like, froze right there.
Andy, you might have to log out and jump back in. Dawn, why don't you ask your question while Andy logs out and logs back in?
Less of a question, more of a comment. I am in agreement with Lisa and also Stacy, but essentially mood check and the permanent substitute at the high school. I would be ready to vote tonight.
Andy, you back? It looks like you're moving now.
Sorry, I didn't know if you heard me or not. What I said was I would prefer to. Can anyone hear me? Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay, cool. What I was saying was I would prefer to have a little bit more information from the Finance Committee before I make that decision. I don't see the harm in waiting until next week. I do agree permanent sub and mood check are essential, and I would want to include those, but I'm not sure us making a vote tonight and then having information which causes us to have that conversation, make a change next week is useful. We can just wait till next week where it is only 7 days away. That's all.
Okay, great. So why don't you, Joan, hold on one second. Why don't you guys have your meeting tomorrow? And then if you don't mind getting a memo out to us that will be included in the packet, just so the committee has a couple of days to really think about it. Joan?
I think I completely agree with Andy, and I'm glad he said it. And I think that the budget subcommittee may need to dedicate a little bit of time to looking at what a 1% looks like, because we could be in that position. And recognizing no one wants to go there, and it's almost apocalyptic, but that's what the subcommittee is for. And we might be working on a shortened timeline, so it might be worth just looking at that. And I wouldn't be prepared to vote tonight. I wasn't thinking along those lines for this meeting. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so budget subcommittee, you've got your marching orders.
All right. Well, since we've gone to everyone, I was just going to ask Cynthia, did you have any input on that?
Yeah, I was just actually going to offer the same. I also, in some way, I'm thinking about for next year. Well, I don't know, for next year in terms of having the permanent sub. There is like unbelievable amount of unemployment right now. I'm hoping that changes, but I don't think that will. So I'm not sure how much of a shortage we are going to have next year. But I would like to have more information and actually look at whatever guideline might look at it, like if that's possible. I don't know if you can get that together between now and then, but I would like to be able to have a chance to take a look at it if you can get it. Thanks.
So just for context, because run rate is 2.78% or 72, whatever the percentage was, can you just some round numbers for people to consider? Every point on our budget is worth, I thought it was 200,000. Was it 400,000? Keith, can you tell me why I'm getting the math wrong? 3? 3, 2.
Every point in our budget is $349,400.
Yeah, I had like close, okay, so close to 400. So every point is worth that. So that is a drastic number. So I just want people to just like 1 point, and we're more than 1 point over 1 point if you over guidelines. So it's a pretty big number to think about. We can certainly pull together that draconian scenario, but given that Brad and Keith would have to do that work and they've got so much else on their plates, I want to consult with them tomorrow about how long that will take and not make that the immediate priority between now and next week. But I do understand the request for it and the importance of it, because that requires some very difficult decisions with a lot of implications, and there's enough stress in the community, and pulling that budget out of our pockets will create a lot of angst.
Oh, yeah, well, recognizing that, yes. And I think it's something that the budget subcommittee should spend a little time on, but not, it's a conversation in progress. I would not advocate pulling that out at the next meeting. It's going to take some thinking and input, of course, from the administration, but having been on the budget subcommittee for many years, it's a process, and that conversation is going to have to happen.
Maybe.
Well, hopefully not, but
maybe. And I have reason to believe it wouldn't be that draconian. So let's see what happens tomorrow. All righty. That's very helpful input from everybody. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that, one of the things to keep in mind, though, I'm not against coming up with starting to the conversations that will lead to this more draconian budget. But I think that, hopefully for this first year, we won't be in that position, because I remember having the conversation very recently with the Finance Committee that because they are so conservative, which we've beaten them up for in terms of budgeting, that while we don't benefit from the school, meaning the schools didn't necessarily benefit from strong economic times, we would also not be punished as much during weak economic times. That's what we were told. So, I hope that at least in the immediate future, we're not going to have to, come up with anything that draconian. I don't disagree that, we have to, think about these things and we don't want to get blindsided, but I'm hoping that we won't get there. And then if we're done talking about the budget, I just wanted to go back to the extended day staff. I'd like to make a motion that we commit to paying them out of the existing revolving account, all of the extended day staff through May 4th. And do we want to discuss that? I just want to make the motion, and then if people
I second the motion.
I'm fine seconding the motion too. But was Brad coming back with more information? Wasn't there something he was going to come back to us with?
Yes, but I think that was more for down the line. I'm in favor of committing to paying them through May 4th, which is the date that we have now.
So Lisa moved it, Joan seconded it. Is there any discussion? Any questions? Okay, so we need to do a roll call vote. Ms. Shaughnessy?
Yes.
Mrs. Listevnik?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Ms. Zaborski?
Yes.
Ms. Hanstead?
Yes.
Ms. Koshin?
Yes.
Mrs. Raffi? Yes. Great, thank you. The final piece of budget-related information I just need to share with you. Last week, I signed some warrants. The first one was a school bill warrant in the amount of $220,000. Sorry, $220,813. And Keith, am I saying this number wrong? Did I write this down wrong? 220,000 or 200? Yeah, $220,813.46. I think I miswrote it. Okay, thank you. The cafeteria bill for $22,160.45, and then another school bill warrant in the total of $204,971.68. So those were the warrants that I signed last week. Next week, I will have more warrants to share with you. So before we leave this evening, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our officials in town, our administrators, for a job well done in this crazy time. If you have not watched the select board meeting, I recommend that you do from this past Monday. Fire Chief Mike Cassidy gave out a report. And he, for one, is the guy I want to be next to in an emergency. He was calm. He was clear. He was reassuring. I feel so lucky to have him leading the charge. So I want to personally thank him, and I think the community should just be aware of the situation that we're in, and we're in good hands with him. So thank you, Fire Chief Mike, but also everybody. I'm not going to list everyone because I don't want to leave anyone out. Brad and Keith and Peter and the administrators, we know that you're working overtime. We appreciate it. We're in this together, guys. So every day I want you to think of a silver lining. And that's it. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
By Lisa.
Second by Dawn.
Moved by Lisa Koshin, seconded by Don Naborski. We need to do a roll call vote. Ms. Shaughnessy,
Yes.
Ms. Listevnik,
Yes.
Ms. Naborski.
Yes.
Oh my God, Andy, I'm so sorry. Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Ms. Hanstead,
Yes.
Ms. Koshin.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Raffi, it is 9:09. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good night all.